Yeah. Good evening, everybody who is online and everybody who's in class. It is so great to actually see the class fairly full this evening. I'm really glad to be getting back to some semblance of normalcy when it comes to these classes and these class sessions. We are going to continue them in hybrid form, meaning that we'll participate virtually and also in person for the classes. These classes are monthly. They're usually the last Saturday of the month. I will say that unfortunately we're going to be skipping December. So I've got a lot of busy things on my calendar in December and I won't be able to join you for December, but we'll resume after the new year. Maybe a little bit different format and whatnot, and I'll get to that a little bit later in our presentation. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time virtually or in class, my name is Mamba Myra. I'm the owner of Hearth Wisdom Store. I have been teaching tarot probably for the last 5 years, not since opening quite. And I've been reading for about 12 to 15, kind of depending upon when I started my tarot journey. For a long time, I did not do readings for other people. I did it mostly just with friends and family. I was very closeted in my tarot practice. And then after we opened up the shop, I started doing readings for other people, and then found there was a big need to actually teach. And I do less readings for people now and do more of actual teaching and coaching and advising in the topics of tarot. And so I'm very passionate about the topic of tarot. For those who've been with me on this journey for a while now, I love talking about tarot in all aspects. So these classes are designed to be standalone classes. We have an entire archive of classes that's available on our Virtual Grimoire, which right now is on hws.classroom.org. I will put that in the chat in a minute. We may be changing that format in the future, kind of depending upon tech and changes that we've had in tech about where you can get access. But we've covered topics, everything from tarot and astrology, tarot and numerology. We've addressed the court cards. We've looked at every one of the suits. We've looked at the difference, how to pick a significator or a current card. We've done the Fool's Journey. We've done the bad boys of tarot, and talked about different topics so that you can learn more about tarot and be more proficient in tarot and maybe find a way of connecting with it in a way that you didn't know before. And so all of the topics are designed to be standalone except for the ones that were like series, but even then they kind of stood alone on their own basis for that. You will have access to this class as a playback. You will also have access to the slides as a playback on that platform. And given the nature of this class, we are going to be covering some basics and some misconceptions around tarot. There's not going to be a charge on this class. It's going to hang out there for free. So if you've got friends who should have been here, should have been in the class, you'll be able to reference them or send them to the platform in order to learn more about it and be able to catch this content, because I feel like this content is really important if you are new on your tarot journey, but also if you're a seasoned practitioner, to maybe kind of think about your behaviors or your habits around tarot and how you can be more proficient in your own practice and take it to the next level. So, all right, let me put that in chat so you guys have it. Okay, so there's the link to our virtual grimoire for future classes. All right, let's talk a little bit about what tarot is. I'm sure that if you're in this class, you have an inkling about tarot in general, or that what it can or what it cannot be for you. But I do want to make sure that we clarify a couple of things when it comes to a little bit of the history around tarot and the different types of tools that you find in things like cartomancy in general. So tarot is a subdivision of a form of divination called cartomancy, which over the time has been characterized as a way of doing fortune telling or future telling through the use of cards in some form. Now, there is not a lot of solid evidence about when tarot first kind of came into popularity. A lot of that's because the origin stories around tarot are a little bit mixed interpretations throughout Western Europe, and also a little bit in Eastern Europe. But there's evidence that cartomancy in general, or the use of some type of form of divination or guidance from cards or some type of paper type way of reading into signs or imagery, was evidence as early as ancient Egypt. So there's forms of cartomancy that have been out there that predate, our ideas of tarot from Western and Eastern European concepts. But it really started gaining its popularity after like playing cards were introduced in Europe in the 14th century. So that our modern form of cards, playing cards, the ones that we have, like normal decks that we play poker with, or I don't know, a lot of card games, spades, whatever, all the playing cards really rose in popularity in Europe in the 14th century as a game form. And there were ways in which those cards were utilized as a form of divination. You see some of that kind of show up in modern forms of Lenormand, or a way of reading playing cards as a form of divination, based on the fact that there's 4 suits, and there's 4 suits in tarot as well. So there's a little bit of overlap. The difference is they don't quite line up exactly with tarot meanings and tarot cards, because tarot has a very specific kind of formula or format that is in there. Now, the use of cards as a form of divination really gained its popularity in the 18th to the 20th centuries, as a way of consulting cards for information, for future telling, fortune telling, during that time frame. And it became very popular and commonplace that even in some cases there's historical evidence that world leaders would go to a diviner to read the cards, or to read the symbols or the patterns that they were seeing in different situations. And so consultative use of cards has been around for quite a while. There are different tools that are used in cartomancy, and sometimes they get confused with each other. So in this case, we're going to be focusing on tarot, but I get a lot of questions sometimes about, well, what about oracle cards, or what about Lenormand, or what about playing cards in general? They are all forms of cartomancy, but they all have different rules, and they all have slightly different meanings. Sometimes there's a lot of overlap, and sometimes there's a lot of similarities, but they're very specific in the niche that they are in. Now, first and foremost, not all decks are created the same, or not all decks are created with the same kinds of imagery that are out there and have the same kind of meanings. And so I really want to kind of hone in and look at what makes tarot tarot. In this case, it's very specific. If it's not 78 cards, it's not tarot. Point blank, full stop. I have seen some interesting decks in different stores lately. Some of them are more of like gift shops and novelty shops. We saw some of this kind of pop up around Samhain and Halloween. I even saw tarot decks showing up in like costume stores and whatnot, and being a little bit more popularized. But not all of them would be considered as valid tarot decks. There was one that I saw that said it was tarot. I think it was like White Witch Tarot, but only had 52 cards in it. Which, if you don't have 78, it's not tarot. It just isn't. So most oracle decks, or fairy divination decks, or angel cards, or whatnot. There's even like crystal, mandala, chakra cards. You see all these different types of themes that are out there. If they don't have 78 cards in them with a very specific split out of the types of cards within the deck itself, then it's not a tarot deck. Okay, and the reason why that's important is because those decks could have different meanings. And you might have a hard time that if you're trying to learn about tarot, to learn off of an oracle deck can be really frustrating, because you're like, well, I don't have that card, or my card that's numbered this doesn't have the same imagery, and it doesn't have the same meaning, or it doesn't have the same interpretation. And so you can find that it can be really frustrating if you're trying to learn cartomancy off of different types of decks. And not have the same resource. Tarot has a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of books that are written out there. A lot of them focus on traditional imagery, which is that Rider-Waite type energy, symbology and energy that's out there. And so those are always really great starts to be able to get a basis of information. But with Oracle decks, unless the author of the deck has done a deep dive of that particular deck, you might only be limited to what we call the white book, the book that comes with the deck. And that might be the only source out there, unless somebody has picked it up and blogged about it and done more research to give you more references on it. And so tarot is broken into two components, major arcana and minor arcana. The thing that makes them different is that major arcana focuses on big topics, life, themes. These are larger concepts that have an overarching view on what's being read. These are usually really focus points, things that you want to pay attention to. They can be very thematic, meaning that they have a repetitiveness to them where they come up again in different parts of your life or in different parts of the reading. Whereas the minor arcana only has 56 cards in it, and it's split up in a couple of different ways. You might hear the minors being referred to as pip cards sometimes too. That's not entirely accurate. Pip is really the aces through tens. That's what are pip cards, because then you have court cards within the minors also as well. And so the minors are broken up into 4 suits. They line up with similar suits that you see in playing cards or out there. They are in alignment with the 4 elements, and they all have their own focus on there. So cups is aligned with water, deals with emotions. It lines up with the suit of hearts in a playing deck, if you're doing those for comparisons. Swords is aligned with air. I call it the suit of challenges. A lot of times it deals with communications and in all of its forms, whether it's verbal, written, digital, body language, whatever. But I think that that's where, as humans, we tend to have a lot of challenges is in communications. And then it lines up with the suit of spades and playing cards. And then wands is our suit of fire, deals with our passions, the things that we love and the things that we're passionate about, or where we put our energy or creativity towards. And it lines up with the suit of clubs. And then lastly, pentacles or discs, because sometimes pentacles make people uncomfortable. So discs is a very common replacement word for this suit as well, deals with the element of earth. And materialism is the best way that I would describe that. Tends to deal with things like your job, abundance, money, prosperity, success, those types of things. And it lines up with the suit of diamonds in a playing card deck. I see that there's a question in chat. What is Lenormand? It is a form of divination that uses kind of a hybrid between oracle cards and playing cards. And you lay out the spread in a very specific spread layout in order to interpret how the cards are connected with each other in order to do your divination in that form. It's got different rules. It kind of looks like tarot, but it doesn't, but it's not. And it's expanded beyond just playing card meanings too as well. So it's not really playing cards. It's not really tarot. It's not really oracle. That's the reason why it has its own category. So. All right, let's talk about some misconceptions about tarot. Okay, I might get in trouble in this section here, and I don't care. We're gonna debunk some things that I've heard over the years about tarot. Some of them are just blatantly not true and not founded. Some have been kind of, I feel like, made up as a form of controlling the art of tarot or controlling I don't know, I guess the who gets to use tarot and how they get to use tarot. So let's talk about a couple of them. First and foremost, your deck does not need to be gifted to you. The reason, so when you go back and you look into the history, like I'm an engineer, that's my actual degree as an aerospace engineer. I need things to make sense, and they need to be logical. They need to be backed up by some facts. So I will always go back and do some research. I went back to do some research to figure out where this came from. Like, when did this start? Like, who started saying that tarot cards had to be gifted? Because quite frankly, in order for you to have a good relationship with your tarot deck, it's got to be one that you like. And sometimes people gift us stuff that we don't like, and don't connect with. The history behind tarot decks need to be gifted was the fact that paper was expensive. And having a deck of cards was a privilege of the wealthy and elites. And so the people who had access to tarot cards tended to have more money than perhaps some of the people who were seeking them out. And so a lot of times the only way you got a tarot deck was because it was gifted to you by somebody who could afford to actually purchase those decks. There's no metaphysical reason why this has to be gifted to you. It can be something that you pick out. And in fact, I encourage you to pick out your own deck. The second one, you hear this a lot too, it's the devil's Uno. There's no devil work in tarot. It is not a form of evil communication. It's not opening any weird spirit doors or portals to malicious or malevolent spirits. That's another one that is on the list. They're usually connected between the two. In fact, it's interesting that in my last class of Wanderer's Way, we were talking about divination, and there are forms of divination that are actually mentioned in the Bible, and that there are forms of divination that are condoned because they're the voice of God. And so there's a lot of misconceptions here about how the use of divination is used in different spiritual paths. And I think it's interesting when we start diving deeper into where did that come from and why did that happen. One of the reasons for this part of it was that divination was reserved for high priests in certain traditions. And so that whole idea of control and access, like who gets to talk to God or who gets to talk to divine spirit or who gets to talk to the universe beyond, was really more about control. You can't do this because you're not ordained or you're not at a high enough level to do that. So if you're doing it, then you must not be speaking to God or to divine spirit, because only I can speak to God and divine spirit. And so it was a way of kind of controlling who had access to forms of divination as a form of control by telling you that it was wrong for you to be able to access that. Okay. Another misconception, it has to be wrapped in silk. No, again, a privilege. Not everyone had access to silk. It was a privilege to be able to own those cards. And so a lot of time fancy people did fancy stuff with their things, and so they would wrap them in silk because they were expensive and they wanted to keep them protected in some way. But there's no metaphysical reason why your cards need to be wrapped in silk in order for them to maintain their power and strength as a form of communication. Stored in salt. Again, I don't know where this one actually comes from. I think this is more when people talk about cleansing and purification. Salt is corrosive, so if you put your decks in salt, it's going to ruin your cards. Even if you put them in silk, like if you wrap them in silk and you put them in salt, it's still going to ruin those cards. You're also going to ruin the silk. And so I'm not sure where this kind of came from, but if it's something that you want to do, there's no reason why you can't do it. I'm not saying that these are things that you can't do or shouldn't do. I just need you to know that if somebody tells you that you must, it's bullshit. So you don't have to do these things. Can only be touched by the owner. This is personal preference. This is not necessarily a written in stone rule. I actually have a number of decks. We're going to look at some examples today. I have a couple of decks that I don't let other people touch for different reasons. One of them is because one of the decks is a very, it's got a very special kind of paper that it's on, and I don't want it handled or shuffled by somebody else who's not going to shuffle it the way that I want to shuffle them. And so for me, it's more preservation of those cards. I don't use them in everyday use. And so it's more because the deck was expensive that I don't want it messed up and torn up the way that I kind of mess up and tear up my daily cards, There are also decks sometimes that as you build a relationship with them, don't want to be touched other than you. And you're going to know that when you start to build that relationship with that deck, whether or not you want to share that deck with somebody else or allow somebody else to touch it. And so I have had in readings where I will hand a deck over to customers or quarants that I'm working with. I have no problem with them touching it, but then I have decks where I'm like, don't touch these, so like it's in it. Sometimes it's a very mundane reason. Sometimes it's a spiritual reason, Upside down cards should be feared. Now, there's also another falsehood here too, which is the upside down cards mean the opposite. That is also not true. They do not mean the opposite. I did a whole class on reversals. So there's different techniques on how to read cards upside down. Whether or not you choose to read cards upside down is up to you. You do not have to in order to be a good tarot reader. And so if you're told that, then that is also a misconception. Must own a Rider-Waite deck first to learn. No, that's not true either. Rider-Waite is the most prolific deck out there where there's the most resources available. And I think that's the reason why it's become kind of the standard bearer for learning tarot on it. Me personally, I don't know why, but yellow bothers me, and there's a lot of yellow in the Rider-Waite tarot imagery. It was also because of ink reasons why it has the coloring that it has, and the pigmentation on original decks and printing and the cost of printing. And so it's not necessarily for you to have that you have to have that deck as a first deck for learning. Personally, I have a hard time reading from it and never could. I really struggled with tarot because I believed that, and it held me back for a long time until I finally got a deck that I really loved and then blossomed into it. Tarot is a religion. Nope, not true. It's not a religion. It's a tool within a spiritual journey, which makes it something completely different. So must be a psychic to use them. I've heard this a lot. This is also not true. You do not need to be a psychic in order to work with tarot. I think you need to be observant. I think you need to have a level of empathy, to be able to pick up and interpret what you're seeing and internalize it. I do think you need to have, a level of third eye and crown chakra being open, to be able to receive messages depending upon your style or technique for how you execute divination, but you don't have to be a psychic in order to use them. It's only for fortune telling or future telling. Absolutely not. In fact, some of the best work that I've done with tarot has actually been in spiritual guidance, shadow work, daily consultation, thematic overviews of my life or in somebody else's life. And in fact, I feel like there's a little bit of a butterfly effect that happens here. Like once you kind of know, you're now in control of changing the future, because we control our own destinies, so to tell somebody anything about their future gives them control to change it. And so I don't know that it's really can truly be a form of future telling. Even when I do my readings, I always refer to it as the things that are in front of you that you're unaware of, that you can now influence, by making different decisions now that we've had this reading or once we had this discussion. Opens a spirit portal or access to malevolent spirits. No. You might be somebody who has a lot of mediumship that opens to spirit and opens to spirit guides. And in fact, you may be in consultation with the person who you're reading with their spirit guides and your spirit guide. But tarot itself does not have a portal access to the spirit realm. What I see it as more of is it's a form of communication with divine energy and insight, kind of like a switchboard, and you're trying to figure out like how to answer the phone. But there's not spirit movement. Now, there are forms of divination that does use spirit interaction. Pendulums is a form of divination that uses spirit interaction. Spirit boards, Ouija boards, communication boards like that deal with spirit realm energy. Yes, they do communicate with spirit, but they're not portals either. That's where you're just invoking or allowing spirit to interact with you. In this case, it's not necessarily like the spirits are laying out your cards. I mean, unless you're laying them out and the spirits are just pushing cards out in front of your reader, then maybe I would say they're involved, but then I'm not sure who's doing the reading. So, and then last but not least, this is one of the newest ones that have come up, that tarot is a closed practice. This is also bullshit, except for the only place where I might say that might be true is when we're talking about a specific style, perhaps Romani style in specifically, where that may be the only exception of where I would say that could be true. It's kind of along the lines of, did an entire class on this about appropriation and appreciation when it comes to different spiritual tools that we use. There is no one particular spiritual path that owns any one particular thing, Now, how that particular spiritual path uses it can be a closed practice. And that's the reason why I said this is where I will make the one exception to this statement. So for example, controversial, I'm going to go ahead and say it out there. It's the idea of smudging is a closed practice because it involves a very spiritual practice use of sage. But smoke cleansing and using sage is not a closed practice. It's also like when you're taking communion. Communion is a closed practice. You don't get to go to the bar and have a glass of wine and say you're having communion. It involves ritual and training and understanding and connectivity that happens with that. And so same thing with like baptism. When you take a bath, you're not baptizing yourself every time you take a bath, but baptism and water cleansing and water purification is a practice that's used in a lot of different traditions. So you can see there where there are ways in which people implement these tools that I do believe are closed because they're taught through lineage lines, they're taught through very specific training, they're taught through very specific aspects of their culture. And in this case with tarot is not closed, but using a Romani style perhaps is, because again, there's not a lot of information that's out there about it. It's taught through familial lines. So, okay, any questions or any misconceptions that you guys have heard that you want clarification? I'm here for the bullshit meter. Let's go. Any of you guys? Yes.
If a card falls out of the deck, do you have to use it?
If a card falls out of the deck, do you have to use it? I am going to cover jumpers in a minute, so we will get to that. Peyton, yes, let me see if I can figure out how to unmute you. Okay, Peyton, you're unmuted. Go ahead. Peyton, do you still have a question?
Sorry, I was talking this whole time to my kids, I guess. My question is, I have heard that you can tell timelines with tarot, like say for instance, wands equals a week, and then another suit equals a month. Is that true?
That is true. You can use tarot as a form of telling time. Again, we did a whole class on timing in tarot. So I do have that archived on classdraw.org, is what the different suits mean for timing and seasons and what each one of the pips can tell you about timing.
Awesome. I will check that out. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay. All right, if there's no other questions, let's move on. Let's talk about picking the right deck. And let me make sure you guys can see the bottom part of this slide here in class. Okay, I think one of the most important parts about being a tarot reader is having a really good relationship with your deck. And I do use the word relationship very intentionally here. I have over the years found that I have a very unique way of communicating with some of my decks versus other decks. You know, the way that the imagery speaks or touches me in a certain part, or that I can look at it and have a different kind of meaning or connotation for it. And so having a really good relationship with your tarot deck starts from picking the right deck. Most of the time when I hear or work with people who are really frustrated in their tarot practice, a lot of times it comes when we finally start asking a lot of questions, it starts coming down to the fact that you're working with a deck that you really don't have a good connection with up front, and for various reasons. So there's a couple of things to kind of keep in mind when you are trying to pick your first deck. The first and foremost is your intuitive connection or your personal connection. So like when you are looking at the images in the deck itself, see if I can get that down somehow. When you're looking at the images in the deck itself, like, do they speak to you? Do you connect with those images? Does it stir something in you? And usually you know that because you start to kind of feel it like in your heart chakra area, you start to see it in your solar plexus, like in your gut and whatnot. Maybe like you instantly think of a word as soon as you see that image. And so you connect with what that feels, what that what that reminds you of. It starts to bring back like memories of different types of moments in your own life that you're like, I know that feeling. I know that moment. I've been in that moment. And so having that connection as you're looking through the images is going to be one of the first things to kind of connect with. The imagery, the type of imagery, is it something that you can interpret, or does it cause confusion? You know, like if you're looking at it going, I love the Line Strider deck is a beautiful deck. It just causes me confusion. When I look at the images, I think they're beautiful, but I have no idea what it's saying. And there's some of these other decks sometimes too that have like kind of these more modern interpretations to them. Like there's a few that look like ink blotters to me, and I have no clue. You know, it doesn't speak to me in any kind of way. And then there's other people who love it. They love the modernization look, or they love classic look, you know, so you have to kind of decide what are you called to? Some people love traditional imagery. They love the Rider-Waite references. There's others who like the modern interpretation of it, or an artistic interpretation of that message. And so whatever you kind of connect with when it comes to energy or the imagery that's in there. The other one is skill level and complexity. Some of these decks can be incredibly complex in their images. I, for one, love the depth of cards. Like sometimes the more information that's available on a card, the better for me, because I'll usually go to whatever my eye goes to first. And then there's times when the complexity of it is too much. Like I'm, for example, I am not as familiar with like alchemy symbols. So if there was a deck that had a lot of alchemy symbols and information available, I don't know that as quickly off the top of my head as I do zodiacs or plant references or whatnot, or astrological type things. And so I'd have to go look it up. Like, why is it in this card? You know, what is this other piece of information that you're telling me? So sometimes more is not better. You know, more imagery is not better, you know, in this case. So somewhere between your skill set and the complexity of the card could help. For beginners, there's a lot of decks out there that actually put like cheat words on there or reference words and those, so that if you're just getting started, you might want one of those decks. There's some beautiful decks that incorporate it in the reversal position too. So you'll have the word in the upright position, then when you turn it around, you have a word in the reversal position. That can be very helpful as well. The size of the cards themselves is, believe it or not, important. I'll give you an example of that. So I have my decks here. I was going to show you a couple of techniques or things with them. There are some cards that are like huge, you know, they're big. They also can come round, you know, they can come in different shapes or whatnot. The size of your hand is going to determine how you handle the cards, right? So if you have a smaller hand, you might want a smaller deck that's going to fit in the palm of your hand. I also love those mini decks. They're amazing, but I only recently got a mini deck for the deck that I use all the time. Why? Because I need a microphone or like a little magnifying glass to see what's going on in those little pictures. It's great for traveling. I don't recommend them as your first deck, is to have those little mini decks or the little mini cards, because you might be missing some of the details in those cards. And then sometimes you get decks that are larger. And some of that comes because of the size, the type of card stock that it's on. So these are the two decks that I routinely work with. They have the same number of cards in the deck, but look at how different the size of that deck, those decks are. And a lot of that comes from the fact that the card stock is thicker on this one. This is the one that I don't want people touching because it feels like velvet, and I don't want fingers all over my velvety cards. I also don't shuffle this deck the same way that I shuffle this deck. Because this deck does not fit in my hand in a way that I feel like I can handle it the same way when I'm shuffling it. And so I end up getting a lot of jumpers and stuff like that. And it took me a while to figure out how I was going to use this deck compared to this deck when it came down to handling those cards. So that does play a role. Like, it doesn't seem like it's a big thing, but it is a big thing when you start getting into practical use of the cards, is the size of the deck, how big it is. Planned usage. daily or occasionally? Personal, or do you share them with others? You know, so my ones that I share with others, they're a little beat up, you know, they're a little arched because of the way I shuffled them and the way other people shuffled them. So there's a little bit of conclave. If that bothers you, then you have to come up with some personal rules about how you want to have people touch your deck or how you're going to shuffle your deck. We'll get to that. Are you going to use it for shadow work or affirmations? Why I made that distinction is because I have decks that I feel provide lighter imagery for things like that, where I'm needing reassurance and affirmations. Like there's a gentler way to say things sometimes, I think, with tarot images. And then I have decks that are just straight up in your face, mean, you know, and I turn to some of those decks when I really need it to be direct as possible. Like this deck here is one of my favorite ones. It's called the Wild Unknown Tarot. It's one of my favorite decks between these two to do shadow work with. The imagery is darker and more hidden in this one, like the things we're trying to cover up or not look at. The images in this one, sometimes people find them disturbing because there's a little bit of darker aspect of that. But it plays into the fact that tarot comes in light and dark messages, just like everything else in the universe. There's positive and negative meanings in every card. Even the cards that we think are negative have positive undertones to it. We have to recognize that. And so kind of depending upon the work that you're doing, what kind of work are you using the cards for? Obviously, if you need affirmations, don't pick a deck that's going to be mean in its affirmations with you. And then the artwork on the back of the deck is the last one, and then I'll get to your questions. I see that there's some questions building in chat. This deck clearly has a side on each side, so it's like red on one side and blue on the other. If you are somebody who doesn't want to know when a reversal card is about to come up, because when I'm looking at this, I could easily know when a reversal card is about to come up in my deck just because of the coloring on the other end, then you might want a deck that has a more neutral back art to it, that isn't going to tell you the direction of the card before you lay it out, if that's important to you. If you read reversals and you don't care knowing that a reversal is coming up, then just ignore that. You don't have, that doesn't have to be part of it. And we'll get into that. Okay, let's get into some questions. Do you guys have questions here in class too? Oh, what are the names of my decks? Okay, the three that I had out here today, this is the Witch's Tarot. This is the Wild Unknown. These are the three that I work the most with people. I have entire boxes filled with decks that are just for me. And then this is the True Black deck. This was an indie artist, did a limited edition. Unfortunately, for those who are not here, you cannot maybe see these decks, but it's very darker in its imagery. And the paper is very soft, it's very velvety. And the thing I love about it is that it's got this interesting embossing. Is that the right word? There's an embossment that happens on these cards that almost has a level.
It's a spot easy printing.
Okay, yeah, so there's like these little parts in the card that are very sensitive to light shifts that I feel, so the images that he uses in those embossing type artwork is very meaningful. He's got very specific reasons why he uses those images. And I find that this is a really great deck to uncover the things that are hidden. So like if somebody's not being forthcoming in a reading, I always call this my shadow card, like the things you don't know or that you don't want to bring to the surface. And I'll pull cards from this to do that kind of work with folks because it has a revealing of those undertones. Let's see, what else do we have in chat? Do I ever use oracle cards? Sometimes I will use oracle cards when I'm doing what I call multiple voices. You know, there's a lot of readers who will do like runes, tarot, and oracle together in a reading. They're basically using different forms of divination to have a complete messaging. You know, and that's what I've referred to as like multiple voices. You're basically giving multiple voices to the tools on the table. I have sometimes used oracle cards with my tarot, but oracle cards again are going to be unique to that deck or that particular oracle, and they don't always share the same meanings, you know. So unless you are constantly using kind of like the same oracle deck in combination, it can kind of change the meaning of your readings when you're doing that. Not a bad thing. I think it's really a great thing to do. Courtney, no, Classro is not taking payments just yet. We'll get to that towards the end of the class. Okay. I am familiar with the Robin Wood deck, and I do like the Robin Wood deck. It's got a lot of druidic, is that a word? It's got a lot of druidic undertones to it. And so again, you might choose to pick a deck that is in alignment with your spiritual path. And this is something I've brought up in other divination classes as well. I'm a gray witch. I connect with the Witch's Tarot because there's certain cards that are substitute cards in this deck. Like there's no devil card in the Witch's Tarot deck. It's shadow self, you know, which is the same meaning. We tend to hold ourselves back and our own addictions and our own limitations and whatnot. And it makes a lot of sense for me because there's no devil in my work or in my spiritual path. And so you might find that you connect with a tarot deck that is in better alignment with your spiritual philosophy or in your spiritual belief systems, you know, and maybe changes up some of the imagery that is something that you're more comfortable with. The other thing that's not in this deck is judgment. Instead, it's karma. And so it has that can be pretty common too, is that there could be some replacement cards in certain decks that fall into more alignment with the theme of the deck. One of the ones that we showcased at the last class for ancestors, which was the I'm drawing a complete blank. Yeah, it was the Hoodoo Tarot. The one thing I love about that deck was because we were dealing with ancestors and tarot at the time. All of the main cards were dealing with people of significance and images that are significant within Hoodoo traditions, but also within Black culture, you know, so things that were not necessarily, so all of the imagery was very tailored to being representative of Black culture, which I appreciated too as well, because there's things that were not open to Black practitioners, you know, and you had substitutions for who you worked with. And so you may find a deck that you connect with that has some of these substitutions. It will still have all the cards though, you know, they'll just have a substitute for a card based on that tradition. Okay, any questions on picking the right deck? Okay. All right, bonding with your deck. This is an ongoing process. It's not something that happens just kind of overnight. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do this or that you can bond with your tarot deck. First and foremost, I would always say whenever you get a new deck, regardless if it was gifted to you or you bought it yourself, maybe in a shop like this or whatnot, is that I do recommend that you cleanse that deck kind of the first time before you use it. The reason being is that if you've been gifted a used deck, you've got somebody else's energy all over it. And in fact, I will routinely cleanse my deck after every reading that I've had with somebody because somebody else has touched it. The reading itself, I kind of want to clear that itself. There are a couple of different ways that you can cleanse a deck. You know, there's no right or wrong way. I've seen it done a couple of different ways. My personal favorite is smoking it. And then I also bind it with a lot of crystals. So I pulled out a couple of crystals from my box that are helpful for my reading. The one I keep in the bag is an obsidian crystal with my deck. And when I'm not using it, it's usually in rest with the obsidian on top of it. So then that way this is quiet and at rest and protected for me for whenever I come back to it to do my next question or my next reading or whatever, not like that. And I keep it with the deck itself, just energetically to kind of help maintain the energy around the card. You can smoke it. I've seen people actually stick them in like Ziploc baggies and bury them in the earth, like for a cycle proceed with caution in that regard, especially if you live somewhere where it's really wet and gets a lot of rain, make sure you do your due diligence to make sure it's really well protected. Everything has a vibration, everything. This is one of the things we covered in my Wander's Way class, is that everything we touch is made up of atoms and therefore has a vibrational energy. So why somebody would put their deck in the ground is that the earth has its own frequency. It's considered to be a master frequency. And so if you wanted to reset your cards, because your cards will have a vibration as well too, because of the composition from a scientific standpoint, what it's made from is going to have a vibration. So sticking it in the ground, kind of like, it's like tuning forks. When you put two tuning forks together, they will start to have the same tone or the same vibration. So you're basically forcing that vibration into your deck. So that's the reason why people put that in the ground, metaphysically, to ground it, to cleanse it, to, and whatnot. But scientifically, because the science person in me needs an explanation about why you would do that. That's the same way. The same thing as with crystals. Crystals have vibrational energies as well too. Once you've cleansed your deck, one of the first things I recommend that you do is, you're going to hear me talk about journaling a lot with tarot. I think it's a really good complement tool, like having a tarot journal. And we're going to talk a little bit about some different kind of prompts or ways of using a tarot journal or creating a tarot journal. But do an initial impressions of each one of the cards. So when you start looking at the cards, when it comes up, having a journal out where you can record what the card was that came up and what was your first impression. Maybe it's the first thing your eye went to as far as the image is concerned. Maybe it was a feeling that you got. Maybe it was a word that popped into your head when it first kind of came up. And don't worry if it's blank. If you've got nothing, you got nothing. It might be one to be like, I need to come back to that card. And try to reconnect with that card a little bit more. Don't worry if you have repeats, like repeat energy, repeat words or whatnot. You might start to find that there's a pattern that is also going to help you be a better interpreter when it comes to like, oh, what is it about this card that I now recognize perhaps a pattern? One of the things I kind of discovered recently about this deck, and I've had this deck for years, was that there's a certain kind of character in the deck that what I realized was the Fool card is the Magician card personification grown up, like the facial features. And so it really helped me to connect to the idea of the Fool's journey being repeatable. Like once the Fool goes through the Fool's journey, it comes all the way back to the beginning to become the Magician. And then once you become the Magician, you're the new Fool of a new cycle. And it just like dawned on me this year as I was looking at those two cards. I'm like, this is the same person. It's just a younger version. The Fool was a younger version of the Magician. And so there can be little things or little impressions that you will pick up on, and you may not know later why that message was there. So writing a first impressions card on it. Take a class with your cards. So when you are learning your cards for the first time or with a new deck, sit down, revisit a class, go to a class, retake a class or something like using that new deck, because you're going to see it in a new light than you did if you were taking that class the first time. And if you've never taken a class, it will help you to highlight or spotlight things that you weren't paying attention to on your cards when you are taking that educational tour, would it be with those cards. Do a daily draw to get familiar with your deck. Now, one of the nice things about modern technology that wasn't around, I don't know, 15 years ago, is that you can sometimes find apps for your cards. Like I have an app for this deck on my phone. So I have it with me all the time. And I do a daily draw with that app and I record it on my planner. And what I found is that there would be patterns. Now, there can be some tech involvement with like, what's it called? The algorithm of the program itself, why it might keep showing me this particular card kind of repeat or over or not. I would like to believe that there's intention even in tech, like magic can supersede tech in some cases. And there's times where that pattern of daily draw was really messaging for me. So, because there was like 4 Tuesdays in a row that a particular card just kept coming up on that Tuesday, or there was a pattern, 3 cards that kept showing up back to back, you know, in a pattern. So it made me start paying closer attention to those cards, what I was going through that day, what was going on at that moment, and it helps me to learn more about that card and how it shows up in everyday life and everyday scenarios. So doing a draw a day, I build it into my spiritual practice, but it also can help you to learn your tarot. Obviously, if you do a card a day, you might only get to the same card a couple of times in a year, or a few times out of the year. You may not hit them all, you know, so that's just something to kind of be aware of as you're doing some of these practices. And then do an interview spread. I saw this come up a couple of times in different blogs, is to do an interview spread with your cards. Maybe not necessarily a spread, maybe just more of an interview or asking questions. So here's an example, a couple of examples of like interview questions that you could use with your tarot deck. You know, what areas of my life is this going to help me with? That's what helped me to kind of determine, this is my shadow work deck. This is my, you know, get real deck, you know, this is my everyday use deck. So it's kind of working with those decks over time helped me to better understand how I was going to use them. What tone can I expect from them? So ask questions and see what tone it takes with you. Is it a snarky deck? Is it a nice deck? Is it a kind and understanding, you know, maternal type energy? You'll start to kind of realize as you ask questions the vibe that you're getting or what you're kind of tapping into. How can working with this deck surprise me? So what you're basically doing is you're laying out a card for each one of these questions, you know, and you're interpreting that card. So when you lay that card out, you know, what kind of surprises could it bring up? Pay attention to the card that it chose to answer that question with. And so you're interviewing that and you're journaling about each one of those questions and answers from that card. You might have to come back to it after you've been working with the cards a little bit longer, but I think you're going to find that the deck was very honest with you up front, but it might take you a while before you discover like that it was telling me how it was going to work with me. What type of readings for other people can I use this deck for? So again, laying out the card to kind of help you determine what is that going to look like, or how, and you may not want to use the deck with other people. What are the deck's most important strengths? You know, being candid is a strength, I think. You know, showing what is hidden can be a strength in a deck. But again, I don't use this deck for everyday reading because it's not a strength of this deck. You know, I'm going to spend a lot of time in the hidden spaces with this deck. And so if somebody's wanting something pretty straightforward, I'm going to go to my everyday deck, you know, to get a more straightforward answer, as opposed to like, how deeply do I want to dive with that question? You know, and I don't answer all questions with this one. You know, is that guy going to ask me out? I'm not asking this deck that question. Okay. I might not even answer that question. Have another question. How can I best collaborate with this deck? Like, what are the things that I need to be looking for? I find that I do a lot of energy work when I'm reading with one deck versus another. I use more guides with the other. And so it just over time kind of developed that way. And what is the outcome of working with this deck? You know, how am I going to grow? How are the people who I'm reading for, how are they going to grow and whatnot from the use of that deck? Okay, any questions so far? Yeah, I don't know a lot of people who, if you're like me, I've got journals for days, you know, like I've got blank journals hidden on shelves that I could use for tarot readings. In fact, I actually have a different tarot journal for different decks, if I was honest about it, you know, so just because the tone is going to be a little bit different, you know, and how I work with them. All right, you guys have any questions? Okay. All right, let's talk about shuffling or mixing your deck. This is the one I get a lot of questions about. What I'm going to say here is there's not necessarily a right or wrong way of how you shuffle your deck. It's more about perhaps the reason why you're choosing to do that shuffling technique or that way, because when you're shuffling, it's a process of clearing. you're clearing the last reading, you're clearing the last pairings, you know, you're getting rid of the old energy. Maybe you're infusing it with new energy for your new question or whatnot. And so regardless of how you decide to shuffle, it's really going to be kind of dependent upon what kind of fits basically with the type of cards that you use, the deck or whatnot, or what you're trying to do. So like when I'm using my daily deck, the reason why it's concave like that is because I old school shuffle it like you would a normal deck of cards, and I put them back together, you know, so that they come back in together. You can there's different forms. So you got traditional card shuffling, which I call arching, which is what you kind of just saw done. I'm not always talented to do it the reverse way. So because then you get jumpers sometimes, and sometimes you want to know, is the jumper your fault, or is the deck really like trying to talk to you? Because your shuffling technique can create situations where you have what's called jumpers, and we'll get to those. Intercutting shuffling, which is, you know, just kind of intercutting it like this. This is the technique I use with my True Black deck because it's such a big deck in my hand. I can't actually get the cards. Plus, I don't want to ruin the card. I don't want to, you know, ruin the paper and stuff like that. And so I treat it differently and I shuffle it differently as a result. It is also the way the cards actually come out of that deck are different now as a result too. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as well. Washing or swirling is this technique on that graphic where you put it on the table and you wash and you swirl the cards together and you get them all mixed in together and whatnot. I don't know about that deck. I mean, you got to do a really good washing swirling. You have to have a bigger surface, and so that might be dependent upon your working area, because I feel like sometimes you're just pushing the same cards around on the top as opposed to actually getting them together. But you can fix that by the way that you stack them back up. And so fanning is the one that's kind of at the bottom there, where you basically fan them out. And the way that you are mixing them up is because you're choosing cards from different sections of the deck. So it's not how they come out in order. So if and you may not be the one who's pulling the cards. So you may like this as a way of interacting with somebody else, is by fanning it out in front of them and let them pick the card out to lay into your spread. So how you shuffle or you mix up your deck is going to be somewhat determined with how you interact with the person that you're reading, yourself or somebody else, and the preference that you have. Maybe you like the energy, like I will usually shuffle it to clear out the energy, and then I give this deck to the person that I'm reading, and I ask them to think about what they want to get out of the reading, not their question, because sometimes they don't ask the question about what they really want to get out of a reading. So I ask them to think about what they want to get out of the reading, and they can shuffle it and cut it and give it back. So I'm clearing the energy. I'm asking them to put their energy into it when I give it to them. And so they may not shuffle it the way that you shuffled it, you know, depending upon people's skill sets or whatnot. They might just cut the cards and put them back together again. And you just kind of want to determine how you want to have that handled. Now, point of logistics on that. If you don't like the other way people shuffle your cards, don't hand them to other people. The reason why I don't handle that deck to other people is because there's a very specific way I want to have it shuffled, and I don't want other people trying to shuffle it their way, the way that they're used to actually shuffling those cards. Okay. And so if you've got a very specific way that you like shuffling or mixing up your cards, either show them how you want that to be done if you hand it to them, or you are going to get different ways that other people are going to shuffle them. It is not required, again, for you to be the only one that handles or shuffles the deck. That's a personal choice as a reader. Okay. Any questions on shuffling? Okay, how do you guys shuffle? If you had to pick out one of these forms, like how do you shuffle? Intercutting?
I used to do arching, but I don't like what it does to my cards, so I switched to all cutting.
All cutting?
Yeah, I don't like reversal, so I stick to it, so I know that everything's
Also, it's traditional and the same thing, but mostly the.
And did you say you do intercutting?
Yeah, I don't like reversal, so I make sure we all go the right way.
Okay. like a traditional card deck? Okay, anyone else? Anybody virtually? How do you guys normally cut, or how do you normally shuffle? Do the wash method? Anybody else who shuffles a way that's different than any of these?
I think sometimes like I'll cut, and sometimes I won't. It just depends on
Yeah.
how I feel.
Yeah, it depends. It kind of depends. Like again, trust your gut here, Okay. All right, jumper cards, because jumper cards, if they're going to happen, they're going to usually happen in your shuffling process or in your dealing process. So jumper cards are when cards will jump out of the deck or pop out of the deck, either during the shuffling or in the dealing process when you're laying out cards. It can happen to both experienced and inexperienced readers alike. Some of it has to deal with kind of the technique or the way that you are, how you handle cards, the size of the cards in your hands and whatnot. So there's a mundane reason why it can happen, but there can also be a very interpretive reason why it happens too. The decision on whether or not to read a jumper card is optional. And so it depends upon your experience with the deck. So for example, when I am, I personally read jumper cards, like, because I don't have them happen that often in my shuffling process or in my dealing process. So when it happens, I read into that this was a card that was intended to come out. I will usually leave it outside of my spread. So I'll leave it on the side of the table or outside of my spread to come back to later, or just to give me information. In some cases, it's believed that a jumper card is like the question that was on the mind of the person who was handling the deck, kind of last. So like if you give it to somebody else or if you're reading for yourself or whatnot, sometimes it's the unasked question, or it's the unasked thing that's going on, and whatnot. There are a couple of ways of interpreting what that jumper might mean, and then how you want to use that jumper card in your spread. I also said that there's a difference. This deck here, I solely read as jumper cards, because it's usually at the end of my reading, after I've already spread out all of my other cards and did all of my other readings. I will pull this out as a shadow card, and I do the this type of a shuffle, and I will look for a jumper card to come out. And so I will just keep chopping it until something finally flies out or comes out of the deck, or it's got to like somehow leave the deck itself, and so I purely read this deck as a jumper. And so you may find that that's how you want to handle a jumper card. It's up to you in person. So a couple of ways that you can use jumpers. First and foremost, you can put it right back in the deck. Slide it right back in there, throw it out in the reading. If it's during the dealing process, you may decide to put that as your next card, whatever placement in the reading you were at the time. So whatever placeholder that was the card that was intended to be in that spot. The nice thing about that is if you put it back in the deck and it shows up again, it's re-emphasizing that point. And so it shows a level of importance to that reading. So it kind of just reaffirms that message that came out. You can also use a jumper card as a significator card or a querent card. So this is symbolic of the person or the situation at hand that you're reading for. So either you or the person who's across from you, the energy that they're in that moment, so you can lay it out as a significator card. You can also use it as what's called a push card. It's a little similar to the shadow card at the bottom of a deck, but not quite. It's more of a theme for the whole reading. That's what I tend to use it for, is I'll lay it out on the outside of my reading as kind of this is an overarching kind of thing going on. And so usually it will start to make more sense once I get through the reading why that card jumped out, and what the message is with that card. So it's more of a kind of a hint, that's on there. It could be a message from beyond. I've had jumper cards be significator cards for people's guides, like, hey, your grandma's here, Like later on in the reading, we start to realize, oh, that is your guide who said, hey, I'm here, you know, to let them know that they're there, or something that needed to come out from their guides or their spirit or whatnot to talk at that time. And then sometimes it could also be an indicator that they need to rephrase the question, because remember I said it can be a little bit of insight about what is really on their mind. And sometimes people don't ask the question that they're really thinking about, which can be really frustrating, because as a reader, an experienced reader, you know when that's happening. Because you'll lay out the cards and you'll start talking and they're like, nope, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. You're like, hold on a second. These cards don't ever fail me in these readings. What are you not asking? And then once you start digging a little deeper, you start realizing, aha, you didn't ask the question that was on your mind. The cards pulled out the cards that were really in your mind. And so when a jumper card kind of comes out, like I said, I'll leave it on the side to either reveal itself through the reading, and then it usually will clarify. Then that's when I know what it is. Is it somebody else's guide? Is it what they were kind of underlying thinking? Is it a question that they didn't ask and that's what's kind of overlapping the rest of this, and they probably should have rephrased that question? Because when I do my tarot work, I always ask my cards to reveal what the court needs to hear. And so I kind of overrule whatever their question was, you know, by saying, hey, I need you to lay out the message that the court really needs to hear. I often will ask with this question, but sometimes that's not, again, people don't ask the question sometimes that they're really looking for. They ask like light questions or soft questions, you know, so. Okay, any questions on jumper cards? How do you guys treat jumper cards when they come out? You would. Okay.
I kind of do what you do with your shadow deck. I tend to kind of use jumper cards for my husband.
Okay. Anybody else? How do you use jumper cards?
I usually put them back in to see if they pop out again.
Put them back in to see if they pop out again. Anyone else? How about anybody in the oh, that's interesting. So somebody said if they go to the left, they use them. If they go to the right, they don't use them. So this is an agreement that you have with your deck. So keep in mind, you can have these kinds of agreements with your deck. You know, you can create rules. When it's kind of like when you start working with a pendulum. Here's show me yes, show me no. You're creating some rules about how you're communicating, like how can we better communicate? And I like the idea of like, hey, if it jumps this way, it was just you, you know, if it jumps this way, I need you to pay attention, you know, or to place it out there. So you may keep an eye on kind of patterns that you see when it comes out. So okay, so Monica says jumpers are huge for me. She never ignores them unless I'm reading for another person and the jumper is for me and I can intuit that. That's true. That does happen sometimes too as well. You know, as a reader, I have literally had readings where the reading had a sub message for me. Like what I was telling the other person and what I was reading in their situation, it has a different flavor to it, has a different texture to it sometimes when it comes out, because a lot of it is energetic reading and mediumship. And suddenly these words will start coming out and I'll be sitting there like, okay, I hear you, spirit, talking to me through my own words. Thanks a lot, you know. So so there's times where there's like sub messages for you that come out. Because we're connecting with people in energetic space, you know, and as an empath, you know, you've got to learn what's yours versus mine. What are you feeling? What am I feeling? You know, a lot of what I'm doing in the work when I'm reading people is I'm energetically reading people. I find that tarot cards makes them more comfortable being read that way. When I used to do energy readings on people, it really unnerved them that I was the one who was picking up on all of their energy and their reading. For some reason, this creates a little bit of a buffer between us. Like, you know, so it's less, they feel less exposed, you know, in that reading. But sometimes when what I know during a reading that some of those messages coming out are because there's something I'm connecting with that person energetically with as well, that I identify with as well. And apparently I need to hear the same thing. you know, and so sometimes those those jumper cards are not about the person, they're about you. You know, that's the reason why you also got to make sure that when you are reading, you definitely need to make sure that you are grounded, you're cleared, that you're cleansed, that you have very clear, where do I end and where do they begin? What is for them versus what am I pushing towards them? Okay, shadow cards. Are you guys familiar with shadow cards? Not shadow work, but shadow cards. Okay, a shadow card is the card that is at the bottom of the deck. When you've stacked it up and you've placed it down and rest and whatnot, there's a card on the bottom of the deck. And sometimes you're going to see a reader who will peek at it, you know, and never mention it again, you know, or never show it to you, never talk to you about it. It is a little bit different than shadow work. It's not quite the same thing. It is a little bit, and it depends on how you have agreed to work with that deck and whether or not this is some kind of a hint at shadow work that needs to be done or shadow work that needs to be addressed in a reading. I see it more as kind of like if you're dealing with like a Celtic cross reading, the number 9 card in number 9 position deals with kind of like hopes and fears. And so that shadow card is more of that innermost fears or emotions that the person is kind of dealing with, like what they're thinking about, what are they feeling, what is this rooted in? I will often look at the shadow card and not tell the person. For me, it's like a cheat. It's a cheat note. It's a, what are you not saying? What are the emotions that are going here? What is the tone? Because I don't always get jumpers, you know, but I always have a shadow card, you know, so I will almost always look at the shadow card. Sometimes I do it before the reading. I usually like to, I don't know, sometimes I'll look at it when things go a little sideways, not sideways in a reading, but they're feeling some confusion or there's some pushbacks, you know, or I'm getting energetically like pushbacks from what they're kind of emoting back to me energetically, and I'll see where that's rooted in. Like, am I hitting a nerve? You know, I don't mind hitting nerves, you know, so the shadow card often will let me know where I need to like untie or unravel that knot that they've created in their own scenario in this reading, you know, and so it's kind of getting insider information when it comes to that reading. So it can be helpful, and like I said, in things like shadow work or in blockages, you know, where that person may not be addressing issues at. Whether or not you choose to read a shadow card is up to you. Takes a little bit of practice, kind of see how it is. When I first started doing shadow cards, I waited until the end. You know, I would get to the end of the reading and I would check to see what the shadow card was. And often it made sense. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense, because that kind of came out in the reading a little bit about why it was there. That's the reason why now, being on the more experienced side, I peek at it first. So it's because I'm like, what are we not talking about? Okay. So just good to know.
I didn't know it had a name, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Genevieve, you asked a question. Does missing cards mean something bad? Can you clarify that question in chat and I'll come back to it? Okay, any questions on shadow cards? Okay, clarifier cards. How many of you guys use clarifier cards, even if you don't really know what it actually is? This is when you start laying out extra cards, more than what you planned on laying out the first time around. Yeah,
I didn't know what it was called, but I do that.
Okay, so yeah, if you've laid out extra cards after you get a card because you're like, I need more information, that's what clarifying cards are for. Now, clarifying cards are either laid out during or at the end of a reading, maybe at the end of a question or end of a segment of a reading, in order to get some additional information. There's a big like caveat here where I really want you to come up with your process for clarifying cards, because I do feel like sometimes you can create more confusion with clarifying cards than actual clarity if you do not have a process or a methodology around clarifying cards. Laying out extra cards for the sake of laying out extra cards just to hope you get a little bit more information is not going to be helpful. It absolutely won't. I almost want you to kind of think about the fact that it exists outside of the spread. So it's almost like you're creating another layer, another spread on top of it. So what does that spread look like in conjunction with your base spread? For example, how many cards are you going to lay out? Because it can't be infinite. Like you can't just keep going and going and going and going. I mean, some people do. Like I've seen readers who will literally read like half the deck, the way that they lay out their cards, and they'll just go through all of the cards and just read a narrative. And that is their skill set and how they read those cards. But if you are limited in time and space in order to do a reading, you may not have time to go through like 20 cards before you finally get clarity on that. So I will usually set a definitive process for my clarifier cards. And for me, it's always 3 cards. And so I will lay out 3 additional cards on any point in my reading or any part of my reading that somebody wants some additional information. And I use a traditional, what was in the past that led up to it, what's going on in this moment, and what do you need to know about it moving forward kind of system to it for those extra cards to help me better understand what the more information that we need. So what you're going to want to do is have a methodology with clarifying cards, because otherwise it's requiring almost another understanding, and sometimes just one card isn't enough, but eventually you get to a place where too many cards starts to get really muddy, in that layout. So how many cards do you want to lay out for clarification? Are you going to use a secondary layout or spread? You don't have to. That's just my process, is I like to keep it simple and keep it moving. I'll lay out 3 cards, and I have basically my past, present, future context built into those 3 card spreads. And then will you answer additional questions that come up when the clarifier doesn't quite clarify or creates new questions? Have to have some rules. With yourself, maybe you don't want to. But I have literally made the mistake and gone down the rabbit hole where I've done my base spread and then created a clarifier that prompted another question, more clarifier, prompted another question, more clarifier. Now how far away are we getting away from the original question? Now I've got to find a way back to where we started, and sometimes that is unintentional for the querent. They don't mean to take you down that rabbit hole, but now they're curious and suddenly I want answers to everything, and it doesn't necessarily line up with the question that you asked the first time around or what you wanted to get out of this reading, and if we're doing it in 30 minutes, I only have 30 minutes, so it's not, what are those Mad Libs? It's I can't take you on a Mad Lib journey, of where you choose chapter 7 and then you go to chapter 4 and whatnot. You can, but it's going to take you some time to work through it. So, okay, questions in chat. Someone told me if certain cards missing, like 9 of Pentacles, means you're going to lose your opportunity in career. I guess the question that I have here, Genevieve, is is their deck missing that card? Like, I'm not sure what you mean by missing a card, because if you're doing a spread and it has a fixed number of cards in it, you're going to miss most of them. And so unless you want somebody who's going to read all of the cards in their deck in some kind of a layout, and then if you're missing that card or it doesn't come up, otherwise I think that opens yourself up to a lot of, if you're doing a 3-card spread, you're missing like 98% of the deck. I don't know what the math on that is, but I'm not sure that I want to, I don't know if you would want to address the card is missing it. Now, if the card is missing from your personal deck and you notice that you lost a card, I don't know. I don't know if that has certain meaning for you. I guess I've never personally lost a card in a deck, or if I have lost a card, I stopped using that deck for reading with other people or reading for myself because it's incomplete now. And so I'd have to do some research on that one. I don't have a quick answer for that. Like, if your deck suddenly is missing a card, does that mean anything to you as a person? I've definitely had decks where I've used the cards for things like altar cards, and so I don't use them for reading because those cards end up all over the house, or, you know, I've done it for projects, magical projects or spell casting that I've done. So if you're somebody who uses tarot for things like spell casting or work and whatnot or not, you have the potential for your deck to not be complete at any given time because you left that card on your altar or you left that card somewhere else. And so I don't use those decks for reading. You know, so, and before you start a reading, you should do an inventory of your deck to just make sure that you have all your cards that didn't end up on the table, you know, or under the table or something. So I'd have to do some more research on that. If somebody else has any insight and they want to put that in chat, please do. We'll come back to it. Okay, any questions on clarifiers? Spreads. One of my favorite topics. Hardest one to probably teach a class on because everyone has a different kind of style. This is one that we were thinking about introducing next year as a class, was just a couple of different spreads. I have taught classes on spreads, but I think spreads is more of a personal choice or a personal preference that you take, that over time you're going to discover what works for you. They help. The reason why you might want to use a spread is it's going to help give context to the card when it comes out. Like, where is this in your life? Where is this showing up? What aspect or attribute of your question is this showing up? So it kind of frames the information that the card is providing. And so depending upon the position that it's in, depending upon whether it's reversal or not, you don't have to master the Celtic cross in order to be a proficient reader. It's another one of those misconceptions, like the only spread to use is a Celtic cross. In fact, it's actually easier when you first get started to start off with more basic spreads, and like a 3-card spread. And that 3-card spread doesn't have to be past, present, future. It can, there's other 3-card spreads that have different meanings for those 3 cards. And so what you want to know is, before you start laying them out, when this card comes out, what does it mean to me based on this spread? You do want to have clarity on that. And I will share with you the layout that I use for almost all of my readings. And I have a prop that goes with it because it helps me to better understand what I am working with. So I use the Witch's Tarot. I'm a witch. And so I connect with the Wheel of the Year and the seasons of our lives. And so my reading is done circular, and I use this as a way of laying out the spread. I lay out 12 cards around the outside of my board, and I line them up specifically with seasons of the year. And there's a section on my board here where I know that the cards that come out over in this area are context or history of where the person has been or what's led up to the situation. And then I know as we get down here before we hit midsummer, so this is all light half of the year, because it's revealed. It's already going on now, or it's already happened. So it's clear, I can see it. Everything that goes all the way down to Letha at the midway point is, so anywhere between here and this part of the reading is where they're currently at. Everything beyond Letha, all the way back up to Yule, is the dark half of the year, are the things that are in front of them that they don't know. And because of where they land in different seasons, I know what the energy is behind those seasons. Is it a time for harvest? Is it a time for reaping of what you've sown back over here? Is there a time for rest or reconnection, you know, with Samhain or whatnot? And so I use a circular reading with this as a prop so that I have definitive knowledge about when that card comes out, what is it trying to say? And it took me years to kind of get there. I used to do the spread without a board, and I would just remember where it lays out. It's just easier now for me to have a board in order to explain that to the other person on the other side, what I'm doing, what I'm reading, how it integrates, you know, and so that they can see that. And since I'm explaining it to them, it's almost a contractual agreement I have with my cards. Okay, guys, when you come out, this is where, this is how you're going to come out, and how you're going to get laid out in the spread. It's agreed upon before we have the engagement or the conversation, right? So no matter what spread that you use, you want to have like an agreement with yourself and with the cards about what that means, okay? Not everybody uses spreads. I have seen amazing tarot readers who literally just start laying down cards on top of each other. We've got a couple of Donna, if you've ever had a reading here with Donna, she lays them out kind of linear on top of each other. I've seen some interesting ones where it's almost like a stacked reading, like the cards that are right underneath it have to deal with the card that's right above it and whatnot. I think that has a lot to do with more of your spatial conceptualizing of like the layout and the format. Lennermore has a layout that it does. It's this huge, that's very angular in nature. So the cards that are to the left and right and up and down from it mean something. And the ones in the corners mean something different, you know. So the pattern has purpose, you know, but it doesn't necessarily have to have. So you just got to find one that works for you. Questions? Somebody asked, where did you get the board? Pandora's Box, I believe. She's in Ukraine, has a website, and she does these beautiful wood things. And I actually just this year got my little matching box that my tarot deck goes in. So now I have a sacred space for my cards and my board. So I know where they're at and everyone else knows where they're at, and they leave them alone. So don't touch my cards. So, okay. What spreads do you guys use? Someone uses star spread. Excellent.
Just 3 rows of 4.
3 rows of 4. Okay.
I just go off intuition and whatever I feel like. So I've done 3 cards and helped it cross, and sometimes I don't use them.
Okay. So a mixed
Like, kinda
bag.
like, is this like significator, and then what's based around that, and just thought
What about you?
you're
Brand new. Don't have a spread.
3 cards.
3 cards. Brand new.
Oh, I'm
She's still new.
I'm so shy. I like the 5-card horseshoe if I'm doing like different.
Different directions. Yeah. So horseshoe. Yeah. So I love the idea of you. So I'm a big fan of using different spreads for different questions. A lot of times, most of this, you have to have a really robust understanding of different spreads first and foremost, you know, so you got to be able to recall what all the positions mean and how they interact with each other in order to do that. A lot of times the white books that come with the decks will have suggested spreads. That's actually how I picked up the circular spread when is in the white book for this deck. It had a Wheel of the Year spread in it. And so I started using this deck with that Wheel of the Year lineup, and I just kind of made it more of my own because it doesn't necessarily mean January, February, March, April, May, June. And that's what people were thinking was that, oh, there's 12 cards, 12 months. So this is going to happen in January. No, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the seasons of where we're at in our lives and on our path and on our journey. And I connect more with that idea of like the light half of the year, the dark half of the year, what we can see, what we can't see, what's in front of us, you know, and the different seasons that presents. But there are some really great spreads out there that are very kind of question based, you know, like if you're doing a comparison, this or that, you know, there's beautiful spreads out there that will line up, you know, kind of parallel layouts that will show you the pros and cons of a decision. So if you have a decision that needs to be made, you might decide to use a decision type spread. There's compatibility spreads out there, like how compatible are couples. So if you're asking love questions, there's lots of beautiful love spreads that you can use to kind of determine, you know, what is the message here that this reading is trying to present. I do encourage people to practice different spreads. Again, a tarot journal is going to be really helpful in this regard, because then you can kind of record those spreads that you're not as familiar with and the outcome of that messaging. You literally can Google tarot spreads for everything out there and come up with hundreds of different spread ideas. There's a spread for every holiday, every Sabbat. You can do a New Year's spread. So for those of us who are thinking about the next year, you know, what is my theme for next year? You can do New Year's type spreads out there. You can do lunar eclipse spreads. You can do spreads for your birth chart or in your birth date or whatnot. Lots of different types of spreads will put a card in a different context that you're not used to looking at it. And it can help you get better at reading because of the fact that you're seeing it in a different context. You're seeing it in a different message than what you're used to seeing it as, and how it shows up. And so suddenly something in the background will pop out to you, or will, you know, become more obvious because you're looking at it from a different context, or you're trying to answer it in a different way. So I think using different types of spreads is a great way of expanding your knowledge with tarot. That's the reason why normally during these classes, at the end of whatever session that we're focused on, I will usually have some kind of a like a reference spread that will go with that, you know, that you can utilize. I also traditionally will highlight different decks. We didn't do that this meeting, you know, because we're dealing with basics.
I swear you had a really cool spread for one of these things, and it was like a swirl or infinity symbol. Or
Oh yeah,
something like that.
I don't remember what class it was, but it was an infinity swirl because it was more of the fool's journey coming back upon itself.
Right.
You know, so yeah, there's lots of different ways of creating spreads that are unique to maybe the type of decks you're working with, or the question that you're working with, or the situation that you're working with. Okay. All right, let's take a moment to talk about laying out your cards. Okay, this might be the only area of tarot that I kind of feel like there might be a right way of doing this. And it kind of depends upon whether or not you like reversals or not. I will say first and foremost, the choice to read reversals is yours. You do not have to read reversals to be a good tarot reader. And a reversal is when a card shows up upside down to you as the reader. So when you pull it out in the deck and you lay it down, it shows up in the upside down position. That's a reversal. For people who want to read reversals or like to read reversals, taking time to study the meaning behind the reversals, it does not mean the opposite. And not in all cases. Sometimes it does, but in other kind of times it doesn't. Sometimes the reversal is actually better than the upright position. You know, so to think that all reversals are bad is flawed. And that's the reason why I think reversals take the next layer of learning and understanding, is because you've got to have a really sound understanding of the upright position and what that reversal might actually mean. And I did do a class all on reversals with different techniques about how to learn reversals. So selfish plug for previous classes. But the way you lay out your cards can be important if you do read reversals, because when you have your deck in your hand, the way that you flip those cards over, you could be changing whether or not it's an upright position or in a reversal position. So I showed this video here that if you are reading a reversal, you are going to want to turn the cards over like a book, like you're turning the pages of a book, because the way it's in your hand is the way that it was intended to come up. If you flip it like that, you just reverse the position. You took it from an upright position and you turned it upside down when it came up like that. And so I think that this is the only time where I would say there is a right way of kind of flipping the cards over. And it really does depend upon, again, if those reversals are important to you in reading. Now, if they're not, flip them however you want to, because most people who don't read reversals will turn them over anyways. You know, or they'll ignore them, whether they come up in an upright position or a reversal position and whatnot. So it doesn't actually matter. So if you're somebody who wants to read those reversal cards, maintain the integrity of the direction by flipping it like a book. So then that way you're not actually turning it upside down by pulling it this way. Or if it's already laid out, another question I sometimes get is, do I lay them all out and then turn them over, or do I turn them over in each position and then how do I read them? Again, that is a personal choice. I personally lay all the cards out first. I take a pause, I listen to them, I read them, I look at what it's trying to tell me and the patterns that might be coming out in the rest of the reading. What are the things that I'm seeing? What was the jumper card? What was the shadow card? If I'm getting kind of like there's a little bit of confusion there. I take a moment for myself as a reader to hear them first before I start reading them. But not everybody does that. Some people will lay out the spread and then they'll turn one card over at a time and read just that card in that position. Some of that I think has a lot to do with the spread. For me, the spread is, because it's seasonal, what I do is I kind of gather the cards up that I feel like are related to each other. And that's sort of like, these cards go together. This is telling a story together. Like these ones are connected. I'm looking for patterns across the board. Like what is 90 degrees across from the board? You know, what is the juxtaposition of some of these cards across from the board? I do not want to get surprised about that later. I want to see it all up front, all in one picture. But for some people, the reveal is part of their reading. They reveal that card and what that information shows up. So whether or not they lay out the spread and then turn cards is a personal preference. Or do you turn the cards and read them one at a time in that spread? Personal preference. Do you lay out all the cards and then read it in its entirety? Personal preference. But if you want to maintain the integrity of the reversals, turn it like a book. Okay. All right. Nice. Yes.
Do you find it more helpful to have, like, if you're reading for someone, to have the cards like face you, or the reversals face you, or face them?
My personal philosophy is I'm the reader. Whatever the way the directions the cards are facing me is because I'm reading those cards. I mean, do you read a book upside down facing somebody else? I mean, you can, you know, I personally look at it in terms of like, these cards are here to talk and I'm the interpreter. So I need them to speak to me so I can speak them across to the other person. So the way I interpret those reversals is whether or not it's upside down to me. Now, I also admit I use the circular layout, right? So in this case, I have an agreement with my layout that the way I read reversals on this board is whether or not it's facing in the circle or out the circle. That's the agreement that I have with that board and these cards when I lay out them on there. That reversals, because otherwise they're going to look upside down depending upon which way of the board it is. So I just look to see, is it facing out of the board or in the board, whether or not it's a reversal card or not. Okay, we got a couple of questions. Let's see here. Yes, the way you shuffle them can reveal reversals as well. So obviously, if you wash your cards, you're going to get reversals. If you are traditionally shuffling your cards and you cut your deck and you flip it, you know, and you don't have all the cards facing the same way. So in this case, I am going to get reversals when I put these together, right? Because of the way that they're facing in with each other. I'm going to end up flipping them out, especially if it's like this, where both my colors are at each other's face. They're already going to be intermixed with reversals. So depending upon how you cut the deck, do you cut and flip? You know, so how you shuffle is going to create, like how you said, you don't like dealing with reversals. So you shuffle them in a very specific way to keep them upright. You know, if you're somebody who doesn't care, you're not really going to care how they're flipped or how they're turned or how they're cut or whatnot, or washing them. So it's you can still wash them and not read reversals. You can still flip the cards and not read reversals. When it just comes up in a reversal, I see a lot of readers who will do that. It'll come up in a reverse position and they just turn it around so it's upright. They don't even, yeah, so. Okay, let's see. I'm making sure I answer all the questions here. Okay. There you go. I shuffle mine so there's no reversals. Yeah. All right. Any questions so far about laying out of the cards and whatnot, or the spreads or positions? Okay. All right, let's talk about storing and protecting your cards. Kind of in the same way as you would kind of cleanse them or, you know, work with them. Once you start to build a relationship with your cards, I think it's important that you create a process of how you engage in your communication with them, you know, and it's really up to you. Me personally, I want to make sure that my cards are at rest when I'm not using them. I don't need any other energetic influence. I do keep my cards here in the store. There's a lot of energy up in this place. You know, that's the reason why they're in a box in here in the classroom, in a bag with my crystals, so that when it's time for me to work with them, I will clear them out energetically. I will smoke them real briefly with some incense before I start reading them. It's because they've been sitting saturated in all of the energy that could possibly be absorbed in that space. I'll be honest, I'm a little less diligent with my cards that are at my house. You know, the ones that are sitting on my altar. I have way more control over that environment. I have way more control in that space. you know. And then I have what are called dormant cards. They're cards that I have them because I think they're beautiful, and I'm a bit of a card collector, and they sit in a little nice fancy box, and you know, I never read with them, you know, so they've never been like charged, or yeah, they don't really participate. They're just dormant cards, you know. And sometimes I come back to them and I'll use them for a season or something like that, but you know, I treat those kind of cards differently. So how you store them is going to be kind of dependent upon you and what your preferences are. You can keep them in a container or a box or something like that. That's mostly to protect them so they don't end up all over the place. That I have a cat who will eat these, you know, so and then if the dog sees the cat eating them, then she gets in on the action too. Oh, see, yeah, bite marks. Don't need bite marks on your cards, especially if there's one bite mark on one card. It happens to be like the tower card, and you know every time it comes up because it's got that little puncture mark in it. Like I don't particularly want to know what cards are coming up sometimes, but because I lay them out real time, I don't have much time to like fret over it either, you know. So they're going to come out as they're going to come out, and I don't have a fear of any of the cards. It's going to say what it's going to say. Use crystals. You can use any type of crystals. So things like if you've got affirmation decks, quartz or rose quartz would be lovely for that. Quartz is a clarifying crystal, so it will help to clarify any kind of energy around it. Tourmaline, again, is a protective crystal. Fluorite is for creativity and communication, so it's a great crystal to kind of have around you. Amethyst, and then I use obsidian. You can use kind of whatever crystal that you might be drawn to. There's some other crystals that are more third eye, crown chakra type crystals that you might want to tap into. You see that I pulled out some crystals that are in my box that are part of my reading, mostly because I'm creating space. So when I'm doing my reading, I'm creating a space for clarification as well too. You do not have to do that if you don't want to or don't need to. I've seen some elaborate reader spaces, and I've seen some minimalist readers spaces. I do think that the less dependent you are on certain things, like I can do a spread with this without ever using this. I started without ever using this. We got to be careful of our crutches sometimes as tarot readers because we create limitations, you know. And so like if you don't have your crystal or you don't have your bells or these things and whatever not, you know, I've literally seen tarot readers just stop in their tracks because the ritual of their tarot has been disrupted somehow. And I think that's a limitation, you know. You should be able to take your cards out anywhere and be able to do a reading anywhere. So be careful kind of like how you create ritual around your tarot too, so that you don't limit it to only being able to tap into that wisdom in certain settings. Does that make sense? Special place, location, and when I say regular cleansing, I mean energetically. You know, so just like you would cleanse it when you first got it, cleanse it after every reading, especially if other people are handling it. You don't always have to do that. Part of cleansing is shuffling too. You know, it's like when you're done with the reading, shuffle it before you put it back in your bag. You know, when you pull it out of your bag, shuffle it before you do a reading. Like I shuffle before and after, during, you know. I'll sometimes just shuffle for the sake of shuffling, you know. And so that's part of that, is you're clearing out the energy of that deck in the previous reading. You know, especially if you've got newer cards and they kind of stick to each other, you know, and then suddenly you're like, man, how come that card came up again? Well, because it was the last card you put on the deck and you didn't shuffle. So hi, we're back, you know. So any questions on storing of cards? Do you guys have any set, I guess, tools that you use around your cards for storing? Selenite's that's a great crystal too to keep with it, because selenite doesn't ever need cleansing itself. So again, these still need cleansing too. So, you know, especially ones that are more absorbative, like obsidians and whatnot, you still got to keep your tools clean too. You know, so the tools that you use to clean your other tools need to be clean too. Selenite does not need to be cleansed.
Oh, for benzoin?
Genevieve had a question. Is it true that it's best to read during nighttime? That is a myth. It is not necessarily true that best tarot readings are done at night. I think the people who connect better at nighttime is because there are more maybe more moon energy, lunar energy, where a lot of moon energy is built into, you know, your empathy, your intuition, your insight and whatnot. And so they feel more empowered under moonlight with that moon energy as a reader versus whether or not your tarot deck is better communicator at night or whatnot. There's a lot of folks who will justify that because where the veil is thin in the in-betweens or the in-between times or whatnot, that can be true too, but that maybe has a lot to do with how you tap into divine communications. You know, do you find that you communicate better, you see more things better, you know, when it's quieter, when it's darker, when the veil is a little bit thinner and stuff like that. And so a lot of that's just going to come with practice though. You're going to start to realize when are your best times. You also will start to realize when you do not do your best work with tarot. I don't do tarot when I'm in an emotional mood. When I've got stuff going on in my own world, I will not read for other people. I don't think that I can tap into the right energies when my chakra system and my spiritual space is all janky because I'm going through some stuff, you know. So you know, it's that whole Sheeran concept of like the wounded healer. You know, can you give good advice from a place of being already wounded? I don't know. Sometimes I think you can, but I personally choose not to. I don't do tarot readings when I'm tired. I don't do tarot readings when I'm hangry, you know. So I make sure that me as a reader, I'm in a good place before I do tarot, you know, whether it's for myself or for other people. Yeah. I don't do tarot for other people under the influence. Some people have great results. We used to do a gathering with some friends. We called it drunken divination. Those are good times, but we don't take any of that shit seriously. So, okay. And so I would never do what needed to be a serious reading for somebody under any influence, you know? And so, but yeah, sometimes drunken divination is fun. And sometimes truth does come out in the middle of all of that. I do it with people that I trust, you know, so. Okay. Tarot journal. I mentioned it a couple times. Here's a couple of ideas to have with a tarot journal and how you could use it to help better your process or your technique. Again, this is another one that you could literally go online and Google, and there's going to be hundreds of different kind of journal prompts or ideas to actually use. You could use a tarot journal to record your daily card readings, your 1-card draws or your spread draws. You can do it for shadow work, you know, the shadow card that keeps coming up, you know, and is telling you what is it saying and how is it repeating. You can use it to record special occasion readings or lunar cycle readings or whatnot. I always do a New Year's spread at the beginning of a year. I do a lot of things right at the beginning of the year to set the intention for that year. And one of them is a spread. And you can look online and there's really cool like New Year's spreads, like things you need to release from the previous year versus things you need to be focused on in the new year or whatnot. And I'll usually draw a card that will set the tone of that whole year. Like, what is the tone for this year? And keep it as an annual theme on my altar. So some of those decks where you might have missing cards or whatever, and I've done that with Oracle too. You know, like I'll have a good Oracle card or a tarot card side by side on my altar for the whole year, because it's just a reminder of like, what is this year's theme? And a lot of times that theme does not actually present itself until you're deep in it. And suddenly it's like, whoa, okay. That was interesting that you pulled that card like 5 months ago, and suddenly it becomes very clear about why that was there. You can do birthday spreads, you know, and kind of lay out that information, or personal readings. One of the benefits of having a tarot journal is that it's going to help you track patterns in your readings, especially for yourself. What keeps coming up, you know, because sometimes we like to ignore cards. I've even seen people stuff them back in the deck, and then, you know, the deck's like, no, you don't get to ignore me that way, you know, and the card will show up again, you know. Helps you to spot patterns. It also helps you to be more proficient, because sometimes the things that we read don't just happen the next day, you know, especially if you're laying out future cards or future things to be aware of. It could be months down the road. you know, and so it takes a while for it to kind of show up or kind of manifest. And so having a record of when you did that reading, what was your impressions from that reading at the time, to be able to go back to it, you know, when things start to kind of move in the direction that the card said it was going to move in, you can go back and look at that reading. That is a way of helping you to improve your proficiency as well. Now, I will say a word of caution if you're doing tarot reading journals for readings that you're kind of doing with other people. I think one of the keys to being a good reader is to let go of the ego of needing to be right. There are a lot of folks who hold on to the readings that they do for other people, like in the back of their mind, and wait for validation of them being correct in their reading. There's a very fine line between being proficient and being ego, you know, because if you're reading for other people, you don't need to be right, you need to be proficient. Okay. And so like when I do readings for people, I let it go. I will not, if you come to me and you do a reading, I will not remember your reading the next week. I let it go because I don't need the validation of being right, because I've already worked on my proficiency. So I don't need you to validate me and tell me that I was right, you know, or that it was true. As you're building your proficiency, you do want to track your accuracy in order for you to work on your skill set, you know, and work on your interpretations and whatnot, but not for the purposes of being proven that you were right. Does that make sense? Hopefully I'm communicating that in a way, because I've seen where that has really messed with people's readings in the past, where, you know, a reader holds on to that reading because they're waiting for the validation that they were right and they were accurate. And what that does is that tells me is that the whole purpose of that reading wasn't for the person that you were reading for, it was for you to prove that you were correct. And the second that we get ego in that space, spirit stops talking to us. And you start getting wrong a lot, you know? So yeah, I think that there's a level of the tarot journal that can be used to help, you know, build on your proficiency, to build on your accuracy, you know, where you're recording that to go back and see, how did that work its way out? How did that manifest? How did that show up? You know, how have things changed? You can use it to record personifications of your current cards, or your court cards. Like, who are these people? You know, court cards are symbolic of people and archetype personalities. That's I had a whole journal prompt of like, who is the King of Pentacles in my world? Who is the Knight of Cups in my world? You know, who are these people in my world? So when they show up, when I do readings with other people, I know exactly who showed up in my reading and who they're talking about for me. But it also helps me to identify that personality type. So when it shows up with other people, I can explain, I can describe what that archetype looks like, because I know who that archetype person is in my life. So this is somebody who is flamboyant and very pretty and high maintenance and whatever. Like, you have a better understanding of what that archetype is. And so a journal can help you with learning that and capturing that for yourself, so that you can bring it into your readings. So, alrighty, final tips. These are just my advice. Again, these are not the word of gospel at all. You completely blow me off and I don't care, you know? So, these are things that I found have helped me over the years, in my practice as a reader. First and foremost, find a deck that you love the imagery on it. It speaks to you, it makes you happy. You know, you get a little excited every time you open up the box or the bag or whatnot, and you handle them and whatnot. If you do not have that kind of level of like excitement or love when you're dealing with your tarot deck, you might have a hard time connecting with it. And it's okay. We have all, like, bad dates, have bought bad decks, you know? So I have dated many decks that just did not end up in the final cut, you know, of me using them. It's also okay for that to change over time, you know, and to find yourself moving away from one deck to another deck or whatnot. I think that it's important mostly that the relationship that you're in at the time is working for you. If it stops working for you, you may need to consider changing the deck. You know, it just may have gotten stagnant, you know. So, and you can put the deck at rest. Like, some of my dormant decks have been past decks that I worked with and just no longer connected with. but I didn't want to get rid of them. You can gift them to somebody else, you know, and you can sell them or do whatever you want to do. I think whatever you do when it comes to ending the relationship that you have with a tarot deck is to do it in a respectful way. These are spiritual tools. It's a little bit of a pet peeve with me when people treat them like party tricks. It's a spiritual tool, just like any other spiritual tool that we work with. It deserves our respect. And so do what feels right for how you dispose of the deck, and make sure you're just doing it in a respectful kind of way. Trust your intuition and gut. If what you're doing feels right, follow that. It's probably an agreement that you have with your deck. So if you don't want to do jumpers, don't do jumpers. If you don't want to do reversals, don't do reversals. You know, if you want to cut it 20 times before you put it back together, cut it 20 times. You know, maybe you've got some OCD things that you have to honor. You know, I've seen people who knock on their deck like 3 times and whatnot, and there's no other reason for them to do that except for that's what feels right to them to do, you know, for them to clear energy. You do you on your tarot deck. Okay. Do what feels natural when you're working with them. Fine, because if it doesn't, like the Celtic cross never felt natural for me. Oh my gosh, I was so stifled in that spread. I hated it. It grated on me. I didn't like it and whatnot. And my readings were crap every time I tried to force myself into that structure. And so I had to come up with something that felt very natural for me and what I connected with. Find spreads that work for you. Keep it simple, but go deeper. Like you can have a very deep reading with a 3-card spread. I think this is the thing that sometimes people, more isn't better. More cards isn't better sometimes, but you can go deeper. You can go deeper into the meaning of those cards. You can go deeper into the interpretation in what you're seeing as opposed to doing more, if that makes sense. Practice often and work with trusted friends who will give you honest feedback. You were wrong. You were so wrong. Yeah. And that's how I learned, you know, was working with people to be like, man, that was not the way I would have interpreted it, you know, or here's also what you don't know, because when you're working with people that you trust, they're going to probably give you more information that you're not privy to in a general reading with somebody you just met off the street, you know. And so working with people that you have a trusted relationship to give you honest feedback is going to help with your proficiency. And absolutely have fun. I love tarot. Tarot is one of my favorite things to do in my spiritual path. And I have tissues in my reader rooms for a reason, but even when tears are spilled, I still deeply enjoyed that engagement, you know, even when there's hard words and hard messages that had to come out, I still find a way of just being super grateful for the experience, you know, and I enjoy it. When you stop having fun, and sometimes when we monetize things, we stop having fun. If you ever get to a place where it's not fun and it's a chore and it's draining, then, you know, put it to rest for a little while and come back to it. So, okay, questions? Anybody? Was it helpful? Did you guys learn something?
Yes.
Good. That was the whole point, was there were new information to be shared. What about you guys virtually? Anybody have any questions? Hopefully I got to all of them. Okay, well, while I'm waiting for some of you guys to type out your questions, let me talk real quick about the next class and kind of things to expect kind of moving forward. I mentioned before that we're going to skip December. I've got too many things kind of going on. And I have a personal medical reason to be out for the month of December, so I'm not going to push it too much and whatnot. So I will be back in January. It'll probably be the last Saturday in January. We're going to play it by ear at that point. But if you follow us on social media, that's where you're going to find those classes. They will continue to be hybrid, in person and virtual. The playback platform of Clastra is up in the air. I'm just being honest with everybody. So, some of you guys who've been with me during this journey this year, the place where we put all of the playback classes has had some limitations for us to be able to fully use it for a way that's going to be both business savvy for us, because we usually charge for the playback, you know, for like, if you didn't join the class, then, you know, we have a charge for the playback, or if you were in the class, we gave you a code so that you could access that playback class for free, since you were there in person. And yeah, it's not working. They're not allowing us to process payments. So we have a workaround right now where you can basically go to our website on Hearth Wisdom Store, either the e-store or just on Hearth Wisdom Store. I think it's even on our Facebook page. You can actually go and access class like purchasing, like you can purchase that class and we'll send you a code manually to go back to any of those other classes to get that content. So if you want to go back and do, you know, the court cards, you can purchase that class and we'll send you a code that will give you access to that class on the platform. It's not ideal. It's a workaround. It's a patch. We're trying to get it so that we can get an ideal platform, but we might have to move off platform to make that happen. We're running into challenges where the kind of content that we put out in general has been labeled as pseudoscience and has been blacklisted. We've been blacklisted from being able to process any payments, you know, to give people access to some of our content as a result of that, because this is commerce and they can do that. In the future, we've been doing these classes for about 2 years at no cost, because I really just wanted to bring the information to everybody. I'll be honest, it's a lot of work, you know, and I may be asking for some stand-ins for some instructors, and I don't want to ask them to work for free. So we are going to include a price or a cost on the class. I decided the number 8 because it's an infinity symbol, and the infinity symbol is something that shows up a lot in tarot. You see a lot of cards that integrate the infinity symbol, symbolizing kind of the continuation or the recycling of stories and messaging and all of that in the Fool's Journey. And so I'm making it an $8 cost for the class. We'll find a way to communicate that to the public for the next classes that we start in January, how you can do that, how you can sign up for it. I hope that that's still not a barrier for people to get this information, because I hope that for those of you who've been with me for the last couple of years, that you've gotten a lot of value out of these classes. Like I said, it's something I'm passionate about. I would continue to do it for free. I just don't want to ask other people to do it for free, or the work that's going on with the team of having to like load them and get them up and all this other stuff like that. It allows us to have a way of comping people for their time to, I don't know, execute the technology of these classes as they are. For those who want access to previous content, this is where it's at right now. It's on hws.clastra.org. That's where you can find the previous classes. The landing page on that website will take you to back to Hearth Wisdom Store's website so that you can purchase those classes and get a code. It is a manual process right now. So if you buy this class at 2 o'clock in the morning, you ain't getting a code that minute. I'm sorry for my overseas clients. I do have people who've been on these classes from like Australia and Eastern Europe and whatnot, but everyone will be in bed at 2 o'clock in the morning. So you'll have to wait until we come back into the shop to be able to pull the purchase and send you that code for the previous classes. So all of the old classes are on this website right now, this portal right now. You can make purchases on our e-class. There's a place under there where there's classes, and it will take you to a square checkout for it. If you have problems and you still can't find it, email us at hearthwisdomstore@gmail.com. I will gladly send you the link to whatever class you want to purchase, and then that way we can get those codes for you. Okay. All right, you guys have fun? Everyone have something that they're going to walk away with and excited to do in tarot? Excellent, excellent. Are there any topics that you guys want covered in the future, or you'd like to see, or you'd like to know that I've already done? Anything? All right. Well, if not, I will come up with an entire curriculum for next year. I don't like repeating myself. So I will find new ways of looking at tarot, new topics that will be out there to explore or to dive deeper on. Maybe it's a few topics where we kind of had to, for the sake of time, gloss over and not get as deep into it. So there might be like follow-up or deeper dives on some of the conversations that we've had in tarot as well too. So I appreciate everyone who stayed with us online. This class is going to be on Clastra probably the end of next week. So if you wanted to get back to the slides or you wanted to get back to the content, you do not need a code for this class. This class is going to be hung for free. So it'll be free to anybody who wants to find it. So please, if you've got friends who wanted or needed to be in this class, you will be able to direct them to this class and it will be out there for free as free content. And so that way they can have an initial introduction class to tarot. So okay. Awesome. All right, well, take care everyone who's virtual. And for those of you who are still here local, I will be sticking around. If you have questions, I will gladly stick around and answer any questions. All right. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.